What are the best lures for tarpon fishing? In this video, I'm going to break down the 3 features that you need to consider when picking out a tarpon bait. Coming up.
Oh my gosh!
Hey, welcome to Get Lipped Fishing. My name's Murph. On this channel, we focus on tips, tactics, and becoming a better fisherman. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. All the products I talk about today will be linked down below in the description box so that you can get some of those and get on some tarpon. The first thing you want to consider is the forage. What are they eating? Tarpon feed on a few things. They feed on crustaceans, which is crabs and shrimp, and they also feed on fish, which can be mullet, greenbacks, can be thread fins, can be a bunch of different fish. So what you need to figure out first is which one of those baits are they feeding on? And then you need to pick a bait that matches the hatch. The second thing you need to consider is where are those tarpon eating? Are they eating up on the surface on shrimps that are jumping out of the water and crabs that are floating by on the surface? Or are they feeding in the center on big thread fins or mullet that are swimming by? Or are they feeding on mullet that are swimming up high? Look around and try to see if you can see any fish eating, and then you can try to match your hatch or match your rig to exactly what kind of forage they're feeding on. If you can figure out where the fish are eating, you have a much better chance of catching those fish. The third thing I would want to consider is the size of the fish you're after. Are you targeting huge beach fish or bridge fish, or are you targeting medium to smaller fish that sometimes live up in the backcountry? Once you've figured out these 3 things, you can start to narrow down your bait selection. Here's a little bonus tip for you. Sometimes you may only be able to find out one of these things, and you may not be able to find out any of them. So if that happens, you're gonna have to throw a whole bunch of different things at them. That's why you always need to have your tackle box stocked with everything that you need. Okay, first up on my list is the biggest thing on my list, and it's the 11-inch Z-Man Heroes. Now this bait is giant, and it's gonna imitate anything that's big. Big mullet, big thread fins, big whatever. If you want to work it in the middle or the bottom of the water column, the best way to rig it is with a jig head. Now, what size jig head should you use? Well, that depends on how deep it is. Is it deep? Then you need a heavy jig head. Is it shallow? Then you can get away with a lighter jig head. My recommendation would be stick to something around 1 to 2 ounces. That gives you the flexibility to fish it in the middle or up high if you need to, but still, if you have some current, be able to get it to the bottom. Now, if you're fishing really heavy current conditions, with any of these baits that we talk about today, you'll need heavier jig heads. Next up on the list is spool techs. These baits are super unique. So when you hook up to a fish, generally you're hooked up. Well, with these, they have a hook deploying system that allows you to hook up to any fish and have extra leader. And this is wire leader, so a rough tarpon mouth can't break through it. As an added bonus, it moves the weight away from the hook so that when the fish comes out of the water and jumps, you keep fish hooked for longer. Next up is one of my favorites, the Z-Man Mag Swim. Now this has become a staple in my tackle box. For the past couple years now, I throw it for grouper, tarpon, and big snook. This thing is really versatile. You can work it up high on the surface if you rig it weedless, and you can also rig it on a jig head if you want to work it in the middle of the water column or on the bottom of the water column. Okay, now we're going to move into some of the smaller profiles, and the first one on my list is the Z-Man Jerk Shads. Now this bait comes in a few different sizes, but my favorite to use for tarpon fishing is the 7-inch. It's super versatile. If you rig it with a jig head, you can work it on the bottom and you can work it in the middle of the water column. But if you rig it with a weedless rigging hook, you can work it up on the surface, which imitates a crab or a shrimp. Next up on my list is a new bait this year from Z-Man. It's called the Diesel Minnow 5-inch. Now this bait is also super versatile. If you rig it with a jig head, you can work it on the bottom or the middle of the water column, like many of the other baits we talked about today. But if you rig it weedless, you can also work it on the surface like a shrimp or a crab or a mullet or even a greenback that's up on the surface. For that reason, the Diesel Minnow 5-inch is one of my top picks. The last section of baits I want to talk about is hard baits and classic bucktail jigs. First up, we have a flare hawk. This is just a lead jig head with hair on it, and it's a staple in the snook, tarpon, and grouper industry. Anglers from all over throw this thing. They work the bottom and the middle of the water column really well for snook, grouper, and tarpon. Last up, we have the hard baits. Now there's a ton of different hard bait companies out there, and I'm not super particular to any hard bait company. Now I'm not super keen on hard baits because they come with treble hooks, and treble hooks just are bad news for fish and bad news for us because when fish shake, it's really dangerous having those big treble hooks around. So if you're gonna use a hard bait, I'd recommend switching those hooks out and putting circle hooks on instead. Now, if you're gonna throw a hard bait, I'd recommend throwing a twitch bait. They work really well at imitating bait fish and crabs up on the surface. All right, I know what you guys are thinking. What if I only wanted to pick like 2 or 3 of those baits? Which ones would I pick? So if I had to pick 3 baits, these are the baits I'd pick in order. The 5-inch diesel minnow. This bait is probably the most versatile out of all the baits I've talked about today. It's the right size. It's a 5-inch swim bait. It can imitate crabs up on the surface if you rig it weedless. It can imitate a shrimp up there. It can imitate a sardine up there. But if you throw a jig head on it, it can imitate those same fish in the middle and on the bottom of the water column. So you can cover every part of the water column with one bait in a couple different rigging situations. That's why it's my number 1 pick. Number 2, I'd probably pick a jerk shad. If you rig it with a jig head, you can get to the bottom really fast in heavy current. And sometimes those fish are on the bottom and you just need something that sinks like a rock. The jerk shad can do that. But if you had to, you can also rig it up on the surface with a reedless rigging hook to imitate some shrimp. The last item on my list would be something that's a little bit bigger profile, and for me, it's gotta be the mag swims. I've had a bunch of success on this bait on tarpon, grouper, and snook, but specifically if we're fishing for tarpon, using a bigger profile sometimes draws those bigger fish bites. Hey guys, I hope you're getting value out of today's video. Just try to remember these things. What is that fish eating? Where is he eating it? And what size fish are you trying to go after? If you can narrow down 1 or 2 of those items and select the profile that best fits that scenario, you're gonna greatly increase your chances of catching a fish. Hey guys, if you got value out of today's video, would you do me a favor and like this video and subscribe to the channel? I hope you guys found this video helpful, and I hope it helps you pick out some baits to go catch some tarpon. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.